Now I'd like to talk about a few things that bring us together, okay? Things that emphasize our similarities instead of our differences, which is all you ever hear about in this country, is our differences. It's all they ever talk about. Politicians and the media, always pushing the things that separate us, things that make us different. That's the way the ruling class operates in any society. They divide the rest of the people. They keep the lower and the middle classes fighting with each other so that they, the rich, can run off with all the fucking money. Fairly simple thing. Fairly simple thing. Happens to work. Anything that's different about us, you know that's what they're pushing at you. Racial differences, religious, ethnic, national backgrounds, jobs, income, education, social status, sexuality, anything they can do to keep us fighting with each other so that they can keep going to the bank.
В Голливуде выпускают памятки, как и о чем нужно снимать кино, сколько персонажей какого цвета или пола там должно быть, получается похлеще, чем отдел агитации и пропаганды Центрального комитета Коммунистической партии Советского Союза. Противодействие проявлениям расизма – дело необходимое, благородное. Однако в новой культуре отмены оно превращается в обратную дискриминацию, то есть расизм наоборот. Навязчивое подчеркивание расовой темы еще больше разобщает людей. А ведь мечтой истинных борцов за гражданские права было как раз стирание различий, отказ от деления людей по цвету кожи. Я напомню, специально попросил коллег вчера подобрать эту цитату Мартина Лютера Кинга. Он сказал, как вы помните: «Я мечтаю о том, что придет день, когда мои 4 ребенка будут жить в стране, где о них будут судить не по цвету их кожи, а в соответствии с их личностными качествами». Вот истинная ценность. Что-то все по-другому как-то сейчас видим, что происходит. Кстати, у нас в России нашим гражданам в абсолютном большинстве все равно, какого цвета у человека кожа. Он или она тоже не так важно. Каждый из нас человек. Вот что главное.
Who controls America? An elite group of people who function in a stratosphere globally and beyond the Constitution, beyond the reach of government. They have enormous resources.
Our politics are being hijacked. They're being hijacked by people who are willing to spend millions of dollars to, elect or defeat certain candidates.
We have a plutocracy. We have a corporate plutocracy, and the rules in Washington are written by the corporate lobbyists working on behalf of the biggest corporate interests in the country.
Well, I think many of the people who are concerned about money's role in Washington and how it greases the skids for private, narrow interests to kind of rule the day believe that the money is, that members of Congress and policymakers control the levers of power, but that the donors, the kind of patrons of these people, are operating the strings. The politicians are kind of the visible locus of power, but the people behind them really are calling the shots.
I'm a pro-business mayor.
Pro-business. Pro-business. Pro-job creation.
Pro-business attitude.
Pro-business, pro-growth, pro-jobs.
Pro-jobs, it is pro-business.
Who gets the tax breaks, and who gets the subsidies, and who gets the bailouts, and who gets the regulatory rollbacks that increase profits? Well, obviously, it's the biggest corporations and the wealthiest people at the top. We've got to get big money out of politics.
36 members of Congress from across both the parties. That's all of the parties. What, both of them? All of them? Yeah, both and all is the same thing. Violated their own insider trading laws. Is that right? Or is it evidence of systemic corruption that goes on between government and big business?
We are going to drain the swamp.
It is undermining American democracy.
Corporate money is dominating our democracy. It's difficult to do anything. Increase the minimum wage, reverse climate change, get Medicare for all, end police killings, fight systemic racism, shrink our bloated military. It's difficult to do any of this when big money controls our politics and dictates what policies are and are not enacted. The pandemic has made that clearer than ever. The CARES Act, passed in late March as our pandemic response began, quietly provided huge benefits to wealthy Americans and big corporations. One provision doled out $135 billion in tax relief to people making at least $500,000. That's the richest 1% of American taxpayers. This $135 billion is 3 times more than the measly $42 billion allocated in the CARES Act for safety net programs like food and housing aid. It's just shy of the $150 billion going to struggling state governments, and vastly more than the $100 billion being spent on overwhelmed hospitals and other crucial public health services. As Americans are still suffering massive unemployment and the ravages of the pandemic, lobbyists are crawling all over Capitol Hill and the White House, seeking continued subsidies for the rich and for corporations, while demanding an end to supplemental assistance for average working people, the poor, and the unemployed. It's corruption in action, friends, and it's undermining our democracy at every turn. Ask yourself how, during a global pandemic, the total net worth of U.S. billionaires has climbed from $2.9 trillion to $3.5 trillion, when more than 45.5 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits. Is it the billionaire's skill, or the billionaire's luck, or the billionaire's insight? No. It's their monopolies, enabled by their stranglehold on American democracy. Monopolies like Amazon, Google, and Facebook, which have grown even larger during the pandemic. It's also their access to insider information so they can do well in the stock market, like Senator Richard Burr, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and Senator Kelly Loeffler, whose husband happens to be chairman of the New York Stock Exchange. Both were fully briefed on the likely effects of the coronavirus last February and promptly unloaded their shares of stock in companies that would be hit hardest. And it's the tax cuts and subsidies they've squeezed out of government. You are paying for all of this, not just as taxpayers, but also as consumers. When you follow the money, you can see clearly how every aspect of American life has been corrupted. Take prescription drugs. We spend tens of billions of dollars on prescriptions every year, far more per person than citizens of any other developed country. Now that millions of Americans are unemployed and without insurance, they need affordable prescription drugs more than ever. And yet, even the prices of drugs needed by coronavirus patients are skyrocketing. Big pharma giant Gilead is charging a whopping $3,120 for its COVID drug remdesivir, even though the drug was developed with a $70 million grant from the federal government paid for by American taxpayers. Once again, Big Pharma is set to profit on the public's dime. And they get away with it because our lawmakers depend on their campaign donations to remain in power. As you watch this, Mitch McConnell is actively blocking a bill drafted by Senate Republicans to reduce drug prices, after McConnell took more than $280,000 from pharmaceutical companies so far this election season. Big Pharma is just one example. This vicious cycle is found in virtually every sector, and it's why we continue to be met with politicians who don't have our best interests at heart. So how do we get big money out of our democracy? A good starting point can be found in the sweeping reform package known as H.R. 1, the For the People Act. The bill closes loopholes that favor big corporations and the wealthy. It makes it easier for all of us to vote. It strengthens the power of small donors through public financing of elections, a system which matches $6 of public funds for every $1 of small donations. The For the People Act would also bar congresspeople from serving on corporate boards, require presidents to publicly disclose their tax returns, and make executive appointees recuse themselves in cases where there is a conflict of interest. These are just a few of the examples of tangible solutions that already exist to rein in unprecedented corruption and stop America's slide toward oligarchy. But there's much more we can and should do. The important thing to remember is that the big money takeover of our democracy prevents us from advancing all of the policies we need to overhaul our racist, oppressive system and to create a society that works for the many, not the few.
Mr. Fine was a loud voice accusing the judges of taking bribes from the county. According to the California state constitution, the Superior Court judges were to receive their salaries from the state.
But the Los Angeles Superior Court judges were accepting additional benefits from LA County over and above their salaries.
What possible justification were the judges using to protect these illegal payments?
It was all about money and benefits. Mr. Fine was effectively a political prisoner for a year and a half. That was unconscionable. Shouldn't have happened. Shouldn't have been allowed to happen.
What was the real reason he was thrown into jail?
This wasn't about contempt. This wasn't about getting him to disclose whatever it was he was directed to disclose. It was about getting back at him and wanting to keep him quiet.
Aldo Wande Chingon! Ask a good question. He writes in, what I don't get is, what's in it for the SCOTUS justices regarding Citizens United? There must be a payoff in there somewhere. Well, like any good magic trick, Aldo Wande, that happened, the payoff happened before. The payoff is the Supreme Court seat. So there's thousands of judges throughout the country. And donors give money to politicians, including the president, and whoever gets the most money from the donors winds up having the best chance of becoming president. The president selects among those thousands of judges, and he analyzes which one has the best business record. Not only do Republicans do this, but Democrats do this. So that is the selection process by which the justices get chosen. Now, all the judges in the country, by the way, also know that.
Yeah.
So now they don't know it as explicitly as this, but implicitly they know that if you have a pro-business record, you're far, far, far more likely to make it onto the Supreme Court. So that is a system that produces these corrupt justices. Yeah. And the reward is being a legendary, super important Supreme Court justice, which for a judge is a hell of a reward.
Yeah. And also they can get trips and gifts and stuff like that. Antonin Scalia was on one of those trips when he died. They can still benefit monetarily.
That's the cherry on top. And the Koch brothers invite Clarence Thomas and Antonin Scalia from time to time to their retreats. Yeah. But really, they're in it for the prestige, and you can't get the prestige unless you've already proven what a sellout you are.
Yeah.
Especially for the Republican-appointed justices that more often than the Democratic justices support the Chamber of Commerce and whatever corporate position is asked of them.
Yeah, and I think as outsiders, it's hard to know how good of a deal they have, but it's so luxurious that Clarence Thomas is literally speechless. This is a stupid.
That might be a different reason why.
I can't pass up a Clarence Thomas joke.
Yeah, oh man, this country is littered with Clarence Thomas jokes.
Well, they just issued the sentencing, 120 months for Jeremy Hammond. For an act of nonviolent civil disobedience. I mean, it was an appalling sentence. It shows the utter breakdown of our legal system and the fact that there is no way through the courts to confront the criminality of the state. This judge is a Federalist judge. She's an ideologue. And she also is married to someone who's a lawyer and whose law firm works for Stafford. I mean, Stratford was a private security firm that worked on behalf of the Marine Corps, the Defense Department, the Pentagon, as well as large corporations like Dow Chemical and Raytheon. We saw from the 3 million email exchanges that were leaked by Hammond that there's a cross-pollination between people who do security for corporations and people who do security for the state. We saw that they had spied on and infiltrated and heavily monitored the Occupy movement. That was one of the big things that came out of those leaks, as well as other dissident groups. So here we have, in essence, a private corporation, a private security corporation that is empowered on a kind of wholesale level to eviscerate our privacy and our most precious civil liberties with absolutely no control, no regulation, because they're private. There's no oversight at all. And Hammond's courageous act was to expose what these people had done to the public. And the response of a court, of a dysfunctional court, is to send him to prison for 10 years. Well, this is just another symptom of a dysfunctional state. And if you cannot carry out reform and oversight and regulation through the formal mechanisms of power, then history has shown you will move your society further and further towards the road of violence. And that's what we're facing. The utter paralysis of the system to regulate itself means, and the draconian sentences that are imposed on those who attempt, in essence, to inform and protect the citizenry, which is what I think Hammond did, it bodes very, very ill for where we're going.
Stephen Donziger arrived in court to a hero's welcome. But the environmentalists and indigenous groups who gathered to listen to the judge were deeply disappointed by his sentence, 6 months in jail on charges of contempt of court.
The only thing that would have changed today's outcome is the one thing that was never ever going to happen, which is for Stephen Donziger to stand up and say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I took on Chevron.
It was back in 2013 that Donziger won a $9.5 billion settlement against the oil giant Chevron in Ecuador. Soon after winning it, Chevron took him to court in the United States on charges of bribery and witness tampering. Federal prosecutors declined to take the case, but Judge Lewis Kaplan appointed private attorneys who once worked for Chevron, to prosecute it, and in a trial without a jury, found him guilty. The contempt charges stem from his refusal to comply with court orders in the appeal of that case. Judge Loretta Preska pushed back against claims that Donziger was being overpunished, saying he'd spent 7 years thumbing his nose at the justice system. And even if Chevron were the bad guys, that didn't make Donziger a good guy. But Donziger, now forbidden from practicing law, has already spent 2 years essentially confined here in his Manhattan apartment, monitored by an electronic ankle bracelet.
The reason I'm locked up is because we were successful, okay? I, along with other lawyers, helped the indigenous peoples in Ecuador win a historic $9.5 billion pollution judgment against Chevron for the deliberate dumping of billions of gallons of cancer-causing waste into the Amazon. That's an historical fact. That case has been affirmed on appeal by 28 appellate judges, including the highest courts of Ecuador and Canada, for enforcement purposes. So why am I the one being locked up?
A UN Human Rights Committee on arbitrary detention has called for his immediate release, saying the judges in his case lacked objectivity and impartiality.
Chevron has even stated that they've spent over $1 billion in prosecuting Donziger and defending Chevron. And obviously this is a message to any human rights lawyer: go up against a big corporation and we will take you down, destroy you.
Donziger plans to appeal the sentence. As for Chevron, the company has yet to pay a penny in damages. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, New York.
But there's a reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged. And nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all. Man. You know? And nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, and blue dick that's being jammed up their assholes every day. Because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.